So our theme this month is diversity, inclusivity, and integrity. And then the topic today is God comes through the wound. Not the womb. Julian kept saying the womb. I said, no, the wound. D. So anyways, it's the wound. Well, God comes through the womb too, but sometimes when we think of diversity, we think that there's a norm and there's that which is divergent from the norm. But what we know is that there is no norm. There's no one way to be. The white European race is not the way to be, and everything else is divergent from it. The divine wholeness and perfection of pure spirit is in, through, and as all creation equally. There is no one right to be, so there's nothing to be divergent from in the ultimate truth. That every one of us is exactly as we are supposed to be. Integrity means being in total alignment with who we are supposed to be. So diversity is saying, well, we're all is another way of just saying we're all unique. But there's not a diversity from a norm. I think that's a really important idea for us to remember when we talk about diversity and inclusion, that we're not talking about the right way and then everybody else, right? So we're clear about really, when we're talking about diversity, what we're really talking about is uniqueness. Every one of us is unique. I say it all the time. Just as every soul print is different and unique, so every soul print, thumbprint, soul print, unique. So God comes through the wounds. The great thing about brokenness, when you think of an image of brokenness, it's something opening. That through that brokenness comes the healing, comes the light. We heard that in the Rumi quote. The light comes through the wound. It creates space. What happens when you break something open? A grain of wheat is from opening up the wheat. A cloud break open and the rains fall. That when things break open, there's actually greater space for more light to come through. The only thing that can be broken is something that is finite. The infinite can't be broken. It's already completely open. It's wide open. There's nothing to break. That which breaks within us is that thing that is defined. It has a boundary, a limit that gets broken open. Whether we are broken open because we have a physical diagnosis that just scares us and terrifies us, and it opens our heart, or we have financial issues or work issues or relationship issues. Those things break us open, and what happens when we break open our heart, there's a little more light that gets to shine through. But that can only happen if we actually feel into that woundedness. Now, when I say feel into, I don't mean attach ourselves to the woundedness. I think sometimes people say, oh, that's where, often it's the most difficult times in our life is a time where we feel the God the most. In fact, when I ask people to share a little bit about their spiritual journey, it's almost always during the most difficult times where they've had the biggest God experiences, the biggest experiences of the light. So there's a breaking open, but then we don't want to get attached to the woundedness. Then people sort of hold their woundedness like a badge because they think, well, that's the way to know God. We don't need to hold on to it, but we accept it when it happens. We feel into the wound. There's a spiritual teacher named Panache. I don't know if I'm saying his name right. Panache Desai. Do you all know him? Panache. Am I saying his name right? I've never heard his name said out loud. I've only read it. He comes to all sorts of communities, many of them being New Thought communities. And one of the things he asks New Thought communities, now, I think most of us know, but if you're new to New Thought, one of the things we like to do is affirm who we are. I am whole, perfect, and complete. I am a radiant being of truth, creativity, grace, all the stuff we said to the children. He has the whole community say, I am a victim. And you can tell we're a hard audience for that one. But his feeling is that until we own those parts of us that still feels less than, that still feels wounded, we can't heal it. It's the same idea of 12-step groups. We have many conversations in classes, many ministers have the conversations about that first step in 12 steps, which is I am powerless. How do we align with I am powerless with what our teaching teaches? But the I am powerless is just acknowledging what Jesus said when he said, of myself I can do nothing. It is not I, but the Father, Mother, God within that does the work. That says I am powerless is that my finite self can always go so far, but it's limited. And then we surrender. That when he was, I don't know, I'm not saying it's good or bad to say I am a victim, but I think his intention is to acknowledge that in our finite self we are limited. There are certain places where we are helpless, where we can't make changes, and there is something incredibly powerful about owning that wound, about owning up that place, because when we start to feel into it, we start to feel that spaciousness. God comes through the wound. Now, many of you have been for many of my talks, and I talk a lot about our internal world. I want to talk a little bit more today about the external world and diversity in the external world, because it's mirrors. And first I want to talk about the beauty and the joy of the diverse world. I'm going to share some anecdotes. Some you may have heard, some you may not have. Every one of us has anecdotes of diversity in our life. We have to remember that anecdotes are just anecdotes. They are not facts. They are not truth. They are just personal experiences. I say that because I recently had a conversation with a woman who's African American, and she is upset about the way the election went, and she's especially upset at white women. And she was telling me, and she was saying, well, you know, sort of you white women. And I'm looking around, I'm like, you talking to me? And then I was joking with her. I said, well, I have not yet talked to the spokesperson for the white women organization. We laugh, but it almost gets to be that way. We stereotype whole groups, which are incredibly diverse within themselves, and we say, you represent all African Americans, and it's one person. You know, so I'm saying that to recognize that within every group, there's extraordinary diversity, and that's why no anecdote is truth. It's just an anecdote. It's just a story. One of the things I've always been grateful for is being part of the Centers for Spiritual Living. We are an open and inclusive community organization that includes all races, cultures, sexual orientations. We have so many ministers that are gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, and in fact, many of our most successful centers are led by people who are gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender. And in fact, I've been in this organization and in this world for so long that I forget that it's still not normal out in the rest of the world. So I love that. I love the level of excellence and humor that I feel within that cultural dynamic. And being part of an organization that is open and accepts, it makes us all better. I grew up with a lot of diversity, not a lot of diversity for me. I grew up in a liberal Christian church, went to a Jewish school, learned Hebrew, learned about the Jewish holidays, wanted to be Jewish as well as Christian, saw no challenge there. For a while, I went to a high school. For 1 year, I went to a high school in a school right outside Washington, D.C., and that's the first year I played volleyball. And my team was all white. And I had a great time. I loved it. We went to all our games. And then for 10th grade, for the high school years, 10th through 12th, I went back to Shaker Heights, where I grew up. And our school there was diverse. It was pretty much half equally divided between whites and blacks. My volleyball team was almost all black. What I love is that it was so normal that it never even occurred to me till years later. Like, oh, that's unusual. But at the time, it felt very normal. But it was different. And Chris Rock, I saw Chris Rock on a YouTube video. I have no idea where it came from or what inspired him to say this. This was a few years ago. He was saying that baseball was getting worse and more boring than ever these days because there were less and less African American people in baseball. And he said, you know, black people don't need baseball. Baseball needs black people because we make it fun. we bring spice to it. And it was definitely true in my at least my experience. When we're on the volleyball team, the girls would all make up their own cheerleaders. So we would end up cheering the whole time, just laughing and singing. And then when the JV was like taking a break, we would just all run out there and we would be our own do the cheerleading for the JV team, and there was just so much joy and vibration. And anyone who's been to Agape, you feel that. Or you go to an African-American church, there's just that expressive joy that is so fun. And for my white world is different. I can only speak for myself, but the world was the white community is a little bit more reserved than the African American community. I lived next to an Afghanistan family. It was just after 9/11, and they moved next door to me, and they immediately welcomed me as part of their family. They were very concerned about me being all by myself. So I would come home, even after meeting them one time, and the girls would just come and hug me and just welcome me home like I was their family. After one meeting, I belonged to them. They came in, they did their homework in my house. I didn't know what they were doing. I opened the door, and they just came in and sat down and started doing their homework. I'm like, what are you doing? You're our family now. And then they would invite me over for Ramadan. At the end of Ramadan, the big celebration, the Persian rugs and the lights. And there was a language barrier, but it was so beautiful. And what I also noticed was the wife, Muslim, incredibly sensual. And just the whole sort of the way Muslim women, the religion is considered from the external, but the internal. And when there was just the woman in the group, the conversation was incredibly open and free. And I thought, wow, this is a whole world that we don't see, but it was so lovely. Diversity. I remember I dated a guy from Mexico for 2 years, or his father was from Mexico, his family, he grew up half of his life in Mexico. He was a United States citizen, and that was nice. And I will say, in the time that I lived in LA, there was a lot of illegal immigrants, or I'm assuming many of them were illegal, I don't know. They stand on the corners looking for jobs. And I will be honest, there's one thing to hate them. There's another thing, which I think sometimes is even worse, was being indifferent. I knew they were there. I didn't have any feelings about it one way or the other. They just didn't enter my realm of thought, awareness. It was at the end of ministerial school. I was sick of reading spiritual books. And there was a woman on staff who had gone to a party that week. This is at the Agape staff. She had gone to a party that weekend, and she said there was this woman there named Lupe, and she was an elder, and everyone talked and treated her like she was a queen. All the young girls were sitting around her and like looking up to her. And she said there's a book about her life. It's called Reign of Gold. So I got the book, and it's about Lupe's life as a girl in Mexico, her future husband's life in Mexico. They didn't meet until they were on the other side into the United States. So the story is she tells both of their stories, their journeys across the border, both illegally, and then how they meet on this side. They are now U.S. citizens. There are stories that just move you, and it opened my heart in a way I couldn't even begin to imagine. And suddenly my eyes opened to all this community around me that was invisible to me, and now I could see them. And almost to the point where it was a little strange, I was moving and I went to the corner to pick up some of the guys to help me move. So they all barrel into the car, and I'm in the middle of Reign of Gold and just feeling it so deeply. So I just want to get to know them. So they're in my apartment, I'm giving them lemonade, and they're like, are we going to work? What are you doing? And I was a young single woman. Never dawned on me to be nervous. I didn't feel any fear for my safety. I was just so in love with this whole world that I had never known about. And in fact, I haven't done it. I'm going to do it because I was just thinking about it today. When I read it, and I was a first minister, so I was always talking. You haven't heard much about that book, but there was a time where that's all I talked about. So it just so moved me. And I made a commitment, which I did not keep, that I was going to read that book every single year because it was giving me something that nothing else was giving me. It was feeding my soul that there was nothing else in my world was giving me. And that's what diversity is all about. Diversity isn't about us giving anybody rights. Everybody already has their rights. We are all born with our inherent rights. We are all born with inherent respect. What we have done humanly in the finite world is we've taken people's rights away. We've taken that respect and that dignity away, but it's inherent. So what we're doing when we say being inclusive is, what we're doing is we're just remembering to see what is already there. And when we see what is already there, what happens is we're not giving them, the others, a blessing. They give us a blessing. All that diversity that I know you've been exposed to, or that I've been exposed to, my friends, it makes me different. So that part of me that's reserved, and then when I'm around my African American friends, I come out of my shell a little bit more, I dance a little bit more, I sing a little bit more. The different cultures call forth different aspects of myself that would never be called forth if I lived in my own little narrow, finite world that can be broken. And so that's what this is all about. It's about opening our heart, because what's happened is there are these different races, cultures, sexual orientations that have been invisible, that have been hurt, that have been disrespected, that have had rights taken away from them. And they're saying, we're hurting. And we need to feel into that wound, because when we feel into that wound, that's when we're standing in integrity, because now we're feeling into an aspect of ourselves. Now we're opening ourselves, our finite little world, into a much bigger world, and that's what God is. God is all of it. And the more our hearts open and open and open into infinity, to include everything, to not say, I am just this, but I am all of it. I am moving from the finite to the infinite, then I'm standing in my integrity as a being of light. There's no way we create heaven on earth from that small little world. We have to continually to break open and feel into those wounds that have been caused in our own life, those parts of ourselves that we have ignored, that are completely invisible to us, those parts of ourselves that we hate, and externally those parts of our culture, of our country, and of our world that we have ignored, and those parts that we hate. When violence is done to other groups of people, and I was just listening to some interviews on NPR just on the way over here, or actually it was, somewhere in our commute this morning, just these horrifying stories from Syrian refugees of what they'd experienced in Syria. Just horrifying, like amazing what human beings can do to other human beings. And I was with our talk, and I'm just thinking, we do that so we don't have to feel into the wounds. We would rather hurt, deny, take away, be violent with something else, than actually feel into the wounds of our heart and break open into infinity. What I love about what this community is about, and what's happening today at the Love Rally, is that we are committed to having the courage to feel into our wounds. The wounds, our own individual wounds, the wounds of what we've done as a culture, what we've done as a nation, and to say we can feel into that, and we can open our hearts into infinity, because that's where the healing happens. God comes through the wound. God comes through the wound. When we feel into it, we allow that space to open us. We allow ourselves to be who we really are, which is never, ever limited by any one identity. We feel our oneness with all life, where there are no borders, there are no walls, there are no boundaries, healthy human boundaries, but one, in ourself. God comes through the wounds. Let's pray.